Here we are again. Before the adjournment, I had a notice of two members who wished to still speak on the reference back, and the first was the Connétable of St Lawrence.
It looks as if I'm speaking to an almost depleted chamber, but I'm sure we must be for it. And it's unfortunate that the Minister isn't here, because I would like to address a few of the comments that he made when he spoke shortly before lunch. I'm sure we all got the impression that he was very cross. He seemed overwrought that someone had had the temerity to ask for a reference back. I say that not lightly, ma'am, because any member is, of course, entitled to ask for just such an event. And the deputy who requested that gave the reasons for her request. What I would like to remind members, as I've just said, I've referred to the deputy. It wasn't a Connétable who requested the reference back. And I got the impression when the Minister was speaking that he wasn't very happy with the constables in the chamber. And indeed, to assist him in his speech, he actually sent out a timeline of the occasions when he had met with the constables. And that was quite right, but actually, I can go back further than the current Minister, because before the young deputy set foot in this chamber or became a minister, the constables had been speaking to the previous incumbents. And in 2014, when we met with the then Economic Development Minister, Senator McLean, some members will remember him being in the Assembly, we told him at that time, or we raised with him for consideration, that the Connétables should become the licensing authority for the parish. And that was, I won't go into detail because that will come in when we address the amendment. But the point is that there has been years of deliberation regarding this law. As the Constable of St Mary mentioned, I think he said he remembers looking at the 17th iteration. It has been going on for some time. And for the majority of that time, there has been consultation with the constables, and it has all been amicable. I would say amicable. I've probably been at most of the meetings, and I'm not aware of an attempt by the constables to derail the proposition. And that's a term that the Minister used on a couple of occasions when he spoke. There was an attempt to derail. I'm not sure that that is the case. If it is, it's certainly not by the constables, because in essence, we all have our individual thoughts on this, but the only thing that we have done to this proposition is put in a single amendment. And that is going back to the comments that we made to the Economic Development Minister in 2014. We haven't changed our minds. We still believe that a one-stop shop for licensing decisions would be preferable. So what I would like to do is to calmly remind the Minister that the deputy was well within her rights to ask for a reference back. We will all make our decision on how we vote when it comes to it, But I think shouting and getting agitated and accusing members of trying to derail is not the way that a minister should really be presenting in this assembly. Thank you, Ma'am.
Constable St-Helier.
Thank you, Ma'am. And the Constable St Lawrence has actually said some of the things I was going to say. It is completely inaccurate to say that we are trying to stifle the industry. That was one quote from the Minister. That we don't want to see economic progress. That was another. I mean, when I spoke initially, I think I made it quite clear that the licensing system and the hospitality industry in particular are doing really well and coping with a myriad of new regulations and pressures. And it's in spite of those pressures that they are succeeding. So nobody wants to see the industry stifled, least of all the Constable St Helier, which hosts so many of them. But the Minister, in reading out his timeline, seemed to be confusing engagement or briefing with consultation. It is true that there have been numerous briefings, but the Constable's position at these briefings has not been listened to. Quite simply, when we first heard in St Brelade's Parish Hall that it was proposed to make the Gambling Control Authority...
Ma'am, may I ask a point of order?
Oh, well,
It's a point of order. It's just whether you could rule whether some of the speeches now are straying from the specific merits of a reference back on the reasons Deputy Howell gave. I just wonder if you could direct whether speeches are straying away from the absence of information in or otherwise, and are straying into more of a debate between what members say, and just if you could consider a ruling on that.
Well, I think members should be aware that we are actually debating the reference back and not the details of the principles. We will, if the reference back is not successful, return to the principles, and that would be the point at which to perhaps explore some of these aspects.
Thank you, ma'am. And I'm merely responding to comments made by the Minister in the debate on the reference back, in which he was saying that there has been lots of consultation. Of course, there have been lots of briefings, but certainly when the Constable said with unanimity, we don't understand why you would take the Gambling Control Authority, unless they haven't got enough work to do now with so many gambling houses closing, why would you take that body and make them responsible for making doing the administration? So we have been entirely consistent, and certainly as Constable I have been saying to the Minister and to his predecessors for years that I believe that there should be greater delegated powers, greater devolvement of things like licensing to the parishes. So this is not a new song that I'm singing. This is an old tune, and the Minister shouldn't be surprised that the Constables, having not been listened to when they were met, then put an amendment in. So I'm sorry that it upsets the Minister that things are not going the way he would like them to, but it does seem to me that there is a lot of confusion in the Assembly. There are a lot of concerns. It is all terribly late, and I sympathise with the Scrutiny Chair in not wanting to take this on. It would seem to me that the most sensible thing to do would be for the Minister to withdraw the proposition and to bring it back to a new Assembly. Thank you, ma'am.
Deputy Wall.
Thank you, ma'am. And I really want to sort of row back on all of these arguments. I just want to remind the Assembly, what is the purpose of government? There are two purposes of government. One is to keep us safe, and the second one is to facilitate, to make this island work. And it's to think about our economy, because at the end of the day, as famously quoted, it's the economy stupid. We have to always think of that in the first instance. Therefore, I trust the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development when he comes along and says, I want to bring a new law which is going to facilitate, which is going to make life easier for the industry, which is going to benefit our economy. It may not be perfect, and I think the arguments in this Assembly are saying it's not perfect, we're not happy with it. It could do with a lot of tweaks to it. But surely it's better to do something than nothing. We're very good at talking lots of stuff and doing nothing. What we need to be doing is start the ball rolling, even if that ball is not rolling in the exact direction that we would like it to go. So my argument is, let's take the first step today. Let's take on board the opening principles of this law, and then accept that it will be tweaked along the way. But please, Assembly, please don't stop the good work that's been done and has been going on for many, many years. We need to start somewhere. We need to put a message out there to all those people who are in charge of our economy, all those entrepreneurs, that this Assembly is open for business, this island is open for business, and that we can get on and deliver for our industry. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the reference back? Deputy Southern.
Thank you, Marma. And I refer back again to conversations we've had today and remind members, as has been said several times now, that scrutiny does not make policy. The people who make policy in this Assembly are ministers. Scrutiny examines the policy that's brought to them by them in order to evaluate what's proposed. And what's proposed here? What's proposed is issues which are fundamentally political. Do we want to go this way, perhaps with the constables, or that way with others? On political grounds, not on the facts, the evidence, because what will that say? That'll say, well, the constables say this. This member says that. There's a difference politically in what's being suggested. So, whilst I might be in favour of a reference back, we've got to bear in mind that the issues that are being brought are political, and therefore we're not going to likely see anything as a result of them. Except we will have a nice analysis about how various factions in this Assembly have spread over this particular issue, this particular issue, this particular issue. Okay, we made a giant mess this morning, and we need to get ourselves out of it. Getting out of it does not require scrutiny to be making political points about what should go forward, or how we should go forward.
On the top of St Peter.
Thank you, Mom. I just thought I'd say a few words, having had lunchtime to think about what's in front of us, and why I actually won't support the reference back. The reference back is quite divisive. We also know that scrutiny perhaps are not keen to be asked to make the decision. And therefore, my position would be, and I'm not sure if the Minister did or didn't confirm this, but I have no problem voting with the principles, because we all agree that we actually want a change to the licensing system. And provided that the Minister can agree that actually he won't go forward on the second reading today, I have absolutely no issue with voting on the principles, and perhaps other members could consider the same.
Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Howell, you'll have an opportunity to speak at the end if no other member wishes to speak. If there is nobody else who wishes to speak on the reference back, then I call on Deputy Howell to respond.
Thank you, Ma'am. Over the lunchtime, I too have reflected. I do agree with the Constable of St Peter that we do need some changes, but I don't think at the moment the law is right. The way it's going to be administered is right, and there are very many questions, and people have come to me with very many questions, and I would like just an assurance that we can all work together to come up with a better solution than we have currently got at the moment. But I would ask the permission
of the Assembly to withdraw my reference back, and to, as long as with the agreement that the Minister has very kindly said he will delay the second reading so that there can be proper communication and discussion between the constables, between the industry, the bailiffs' chambers, who I don't think have been involved, and the Minister. Thank you, sir. Ma'am.
Ma'am, could I just want to check if I could have a point of clarification if the deputy is willing
Are you
to?
willing to give way, Deputy? No, she's not. Very well, then the Assembly has asked whether they endorse the request of Deputy Howell to withdraw her proposal for
Can you
reference
have the
back.
appel, please, ma'am?
The appel has been called for. Members in the vicinity asked to return to their seats. The debate is on whether the vote is on whether to withdraw the reference back.
Can I just ask a point of clarification? We still don't know what's in the reference back.
Well, I think Deputy Howell did itemise what it was that she was looking for detail-wise, but she's now asking the leave of the Assembly to withdraw that proposition, and so that is the question that we're going to be voting on now.
Mum, the only thing is that I didn't write down the 5 points, and I stick to the point that I don't think most people in this assembly know what they are. And so therefore we're deciding whether to end the reference back of something we don't know what the reference back is.
Well, I think
Deputy,
I think if we were voting on the reference back, then I would have asked Deputy Howell to reiterate the 5 points that she wished to have detailed responses on. But I think given that she is actually asking us to end to not go forward with the reference back, that it would be not necessary. In which case, I think we can move to the vote. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, ma'am. For somebody who really values productivity, the last
Sorry, point of order. Is it customary to have speeches on?
Not really, no.
Right, I thought we were just saying whether we supported a proposition to withdraw.
Deputy Scott, I think we will simply move to the vote. I'll ask the greffier, please, to open the vote. Members, if they wish to vote for rescinding the reference back, should vote pour. If they would like to continue with the reference back, then they vote contre. All members have had an opportunity of casting their vote. I'll ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the proposition has been carried. There were 37 votes in favour and 4 votes contre and 2 abstentions. So we now return to the principals. And when we were at that stage before, I had the Constable of St Mary on my list as wanting to speak.
Thank you, ma'am. I think what I was going to say before I already said in the reference back debate. Thank you, sir. Ma'am.
Thank you, Conatub. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Coles.
Thank you, ma'am. This has been fun, hasn't it, ladies and gentlemen? So, ma'am, I must admit, I very much, I think it was been mentioned in the points for the reference back that I very do support the fact that the licensing law in Jersey does need to move forward, it does need to be updated. And I think the biggest challenge is the question before us is that we don't know if this, as proposed by the Minister or proposed by the amendment brought by the constables, is the right way to do it. And I'm still not sure that I know if it's the right way to do it. And I also don't agree that scrutiny is the body in which that's going to say that this is actually the way to do it, because as Deputy Southern has mentioned, that is a political decision. They could give commentary that they think there's things in the Constable's Amendment, which is very good. They could say the bit that the Minister's brought is very good, but they don't necessarily align. If it was my opinion, ma'am, if I really put much thought, I would have been looking at the parish of St Helier to lead more in this rather than each of the constables individually, because St Helier has the most licensed premises in the island. So why not let them be the centre and then evolve it out to the other parishes as they see fit it needs to be? So, Mum, I'm in a position where I can support the principles, But has been indicated previously that if the Minister would like to take it back in second reading, that would probably be advised at this stage, because I'm not sure I could directly support the Constable's amendment or as proposed, because I don't see how they align. But I think there is something in there that could get us a good and new modern licensing law.
Councillor Brallard.
Thank you, Ma'am. The constables, ma'am, have been an integral part of the licensing law since time immemorial, and it has adapted over the years to the needs of the economy of the day. And I do believe it needs to evolve further, personally, and the contributions of stakeholders, whether it be the Hospitality Association, the breweries, the various shops off licences, is appreciated. It might be considered regrettable, ma'am, that the constable is no longer required to taste the first cask of a brew of beer or cask of wine. But we've moved on. And the latest iteration, whereby the numbers of categories are being reduced, as proposed, is an improvement, and I believe welcomed by licensees and parish administrations. I speak of parish administration, so Madam, we're the ones that have to go out and inspect the licensed premises, so it is really quite fundamental. I'm pleased to note that the proposals retain the requirement of input in applications by parish assemblies. My experience is that a licence application will very often stimulate a larger attendance at assemblies. The public are interested, and it is a true democratic process, as has been mentioned by the Constable of St Helier. The holder of a licence was in times past considered an esteemed person, and of course they still are. We have some present here. And indeed, holding a licence was a privilege. The situation today is that very often, for ease of administration, the licence is held in an organisation's central office by a designated representative of that body. The consequence of that, ma'am, is that a manager has to be appointed, and it is fair to say that some of the larger companies struggle to provide people of the calibre necessary or described under the present law to run a busy establishment. The Minister has proposed that the rules regarding the appointment of managers be relaxed, but I must say that in my experience in interviewing a lot of prospective managers of the licence holders in my parish, this dictates, in my view, that that particular area needs further scrutiny. The licensing bench presently works in tandem with the parishes in administering the issue of licences and are content, I understand, to continue to do so if desired. I haven't seen evidence of the bench having been part of the Minister's consultation process, but I do believe they should remain as an ultimate appeal body, and indeed, in my experience, are not shy in questioning decisions made at parish level. I have concern over the suggestion that the Gambling Commission be appointed as the licensing authority, and whilst I have the greatest of respect for the commissioners involved, I cannot see what value an expensive arm's length organisation can add to the process, apart from increased cost and bureaucracy. Whilst the Minister has indicated costs will be controlled, it seems to me that the Commission will need to recover its presently significant costs. I don't wish to talk to the upcoming amendment any further to this proposition, which will come later in the debate, but in brief terms, the Comité have proposed that the parishes deal entirely with the licensing administration, whilst retaining the category modernisation as proposed by the Minister and eagerly supported by members of the Hospitality Association and others. Given that the parishes already deal with the bulk of issues surrounding licences, we feel that we are better placed to deal with the administration in a speedy and less costly manner. I would just add that we inspect premises, I alluded to before, on an annual basis to ensure compliance with the law, and I'm grateful to the members of our honorary police who do this. I believe that regular inspections are necessary, and particularly in the light of the tragic circumstances in Commencement last month. And we don't really want to be in a position to be admitting to the fact that we haven't inspected premises, as did the local authority there. There is no doubt in my mind, ma'am, that the proposition needs further review in order to accommodate the needs primarily of the public, those in the Hospitality Association, and the large number of other licence holders. In conclusion, ma'am, I do appreciate the Minister's keenness to progress the matter during this term of the Assembly, and if it's possible to achieve that, I would be supportive. Thank you, ma'am.
Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. I will keep it very brief. I would like to thank the Minister for a pragmatic response to the situation, and my understanding of the situation is that if we do pass the principles, that will, when the Minister is asked whether he wishes to move it in second reading, he will say no, and therefore we will not debate those amendments. And I think that is a sensible, pragmatic response to the fact that there's clearly been some confusion. And I also would congratulate Deputy Howell for her role in ensuring that happened. It is coincidental, actually, that I happen to have lunch with somebody who has a very deep and long involvement with the licensed trade and the hospitality industry, and his view was very clear that change was needed, absolutely clear that change was needed, and that the broad principles of change as proposed are the right ones. And so I just use my speech to reiterate the point I made earlier when talking about one of the amendments, which was that I think in terms of the broad principles of simplifying the categories and having an independent body, I'm content to approve those, and therefore I shall be voting for the principles. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, ma'am. Notwithstanding everything that's happened in the last few hours on this, I did just want to offer some words of commendation to the Minister, because this issue of the alcohol licensing law is something that I've seen multiple false starts on in my time in politics, and the fact that this has got this far is hopefully a sign that the end is on the horizon, and that we will have a modern fit-for-purpose alcohol licensing law sooner rather than later. And again, notwithstanding the contention that there is over who the licensing authority or authorities ought to be, there's no doubt, I hope, that the simplified structure of those licenses that's proposed by the Minister absolutely has some merits in it. And I hope that we're in a position soon to have a modern, fit-for-purpose alcohol licensing law that will support a decent, thriving hospitality industry in the island for locals and visitors alike. That's something that's not just good for our economy, but for our social well-being as a community too, and the more freedom that we can give to business people who are running venues to do what the clientele want and be able to meet the desires that people want to enjoy themselves, then that's got to be a good thing. Getting rid of unnecessary red tape in this kind of thing is absolutely the right thing to be doing. For what it's worth, I think, having had a long-held position that St Helier should have an elected council to help run a modern administration for the capital of the island that doesn't necessarily have to look the same as the way the other 11 parishes are governed. I hope that whatever solution is arrived at in this, that in the capital of the island, that we have a strong position for the parish administration to play in that, because of the local accountability that there is there. But there's many different ways that can be delivered, and in getting to this point where today we'll only be voting on the principles, I'm very happy to do so and hope that it is a step towards getting this finished one way or another, so that we don't do what we've seen time and time before, is see it fall off the agenda only to come back years and years later when lots of the issues, the answers to fix them are not rocket science and ought to be adopted in some shape or form.
Deputy Miller.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm not going to say a great deal, really, to hear. I agree with
great amount of what Deputy Mezek just said. I don't express a view on whether St Helier needs its own local authority, but because that's another question altogether, which I'm not familiar with. But I agree with him that I think this is a law that needs modernisation. It does need review. I do support the principles. And the thing that I would just like to comment on in particular is the proposal that the Gambling Commission be repurposed to also cover the issue of alcohol licensing, alcohol licenses. Seems to me to make absolute sense that if we are going to have a new licensing assembly of some form, which takes the view that the court has better things to be doing than issuing alcohol licenses, it makes absolute sense to extend the powers of an existing body rather than do what we always do, which is create yet another new one, which will need its own premises and its own staff and its own administration. It seems to me that while the two would appear to be quite different, there are very close similarities and very similar aspects to be taken into consideration between issuing an alcohol licence and issuing a gambling licence. My knowledge of the gambling framework is 20 years old at least. My recollection was in those days that there was a finite amount of licences that could be issued for gambling. I think it was something like 29, either 26 or 29. And once those licences were issued, you couldn't have any more. So there's a different magnitude in terms of licensing. But if the Commission is going to work with the parishes, there is no reason why that should not work. The issues in issuing a gambling licence, as I say, are very similar, which is excluding children from the premises, making sure that vulnerable people are excluded or dealt with carefully in the premises, and that antisocial behaviour surrounding that is well managed and controlled. I think alcohol addiction clearly is a very significant and damaging problem. I think gambling addiction is even more so, because someone can just keep going and going and going. An alcoholic will fall over at some point, generally speaking, but a gambler can keep going for a very, very, very long time. So I think the Gambling Commission, they will need a bit of upskilling, I've no doubt, but I am sure they are up to the task, and I don't think it's a massive stretch to ask them to extend from gambling licensing to alcohol licensing if that is the will of the Assembly and that is the way forward. So I'll be supporting the principles. Thank you.
Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, Mum. Mum, I think that despite the fact that many members may have found the last hour and a half or so of this morning's debate quite fraught, I think it actually was really important that some of the points were put on the record by a cross-section of members, and I'm glad that we've got to the same point effectively that I think is a helpful one. The reason I was going to support the reference back was largely that it would have also allowed a breathing space for the department of the Minister, the Comité de Carnatab and other interested parties to get around a table and say, actually, despite the fact that there is a large amount of consensus that generally a new law may be required and that there are some easy wins in here, there is a great deal of contention which fundamentally boils down to who administers this law, and do we need to create not just a new law in its entirety but a completely new body. The body itself already exists, of course, but it would be transmogrifying to have a much wider role, which would not simply include gambling, but would also include the licensing and administration of alcohol licenses. So I think that is where the contention is, largely, and there are other issues which are also contentious. So the devil is very much in the detail, and at the moment the devil is in some of those contentious articles. I think what this will allow, this period will allow a chance for the devil to be exercised potentially from some of those articles. And as I've said before, it wouldn't have been appropriate for our panel, I don't think, to actually opine on which of those mechanisms was better, especially when in fact the Minister has now agreed that he will move this in the first reading. he won't move it in the second reading. That's not something that should be considered radical. I mean, we need to see more of that actually in the parliamentary process. That's what normally happens in parliaments, is that a government will propose a bill in the first reading and it will automatically be paused. And then everybody can start to have a conversation. Does it go to a select committee? Does it go to the second chamber for consideration at some point? Is it the fact that actually backbenchers want to have some input into it, more industry consultation on what it really means? And actually that's what's going to happen. It's in the minister's hands now if he brings the second reading back at the next sitting, whether he thinks that actually there's some more fundamental work. But he will have moved the argument and the debate forward because we've already had the debate. What we do need to be mindful of is that we do still have a proper debate on this, because the principles themselves do need to be justified, I believe. I'm saying this point now, I suppose, taking my scrutiny hat off, is that the case that needs to be proven here is that the current system is so bad and so deficient that it needs a completely new law. I'm happy to make some arguments probably in favour of that. I think my non-scrutiny hat would say, yes, I think there's quite a few things. There's definitely an issue here for me that actually, whilst that this should be administered by the judiciary, because that's essentially what we have, isn't it? We've got a system which is administered by the judiciary, and the real contentious part for me is that actually the judiciary, the Attorney General at the moment, is making or can make policy decisions when it comes to alcohol, and these policy decisions need to be made by elected members of our island's government, essentially, and then put to the Assembly for approval. That's the fundamental thing I think that needs to change, and this law will allow that to happen. And I think, I don't speak for the judiciary or the Attorney General's department, but I think instinctively there has been a long-standing recognition that there's a bit of uncomfortableness with that situation. On the other hand, of course, there is a pragmatism to it. I think that for many, the system works very well. So there is this theoretical idea that for one part of it, it's absolutely not appropriate for anybody other than elected members to be making policy decisions on any area of law, including on alcohol. But the system, it has to be said, many people in Jersey think does work for them. It doesn't work for everybody. So I just bear that in mind and ask the Minister to perhaps talk to that in the summing up, to reassure members that actually, as one of the constables said, that this is not about throwing the baby out with the bath water. Ma'am, I think there is, as I've said, a case for this new law. It's probably obvious that the number of categories that exist at the moment can be streamlined. I don't accept the juxtaposition, or rather the dichotomy, and that's been made earlier in this debate, that if you're not in favour of this particular iteration of the law, then you're somehow anti-business and you're against the hospitality industry. I think that's both incorrect but also actually slightly offensive. I think it is possible to say that actually we all want to see a thriving hospitality industry in Jersey, notwithstanding that we might all have slightly different concerns about where the right level of intervention should come on preventing things like alcoholism, problem drinking, antisocial behaviour. And of course it is often the parishes who are well placed and who often have to deal with the consequences of policing some of the unintended and less desirable aspects of drinking in Jersey, sir. So it is a complex picture, and I think actually, whilst it might not have been the easiest debates, we've probably covered ourselves in some element of, shall I say, glory? Maybe that's too embellished, but I think we've done the job that the Assembly should be doing in asking the Minister to say, okay, you're onto something here, does need a new law, but some of the detail certainly needs to be looked at, and some of that fundamental principle about whether or not we create and add to a new, some might call it a quango, some might call it actually a really efficient use of a pre-existing body that's doing, I think, a relatively good job already in one area versus how it might be done. Let me finish with this last point, because there's a long history in this chamber of factions or fractions and lines which are interesting, aren't there? I've seen them over the last 18 years. And if we want to try and portray members with a certain pastiche or cliche, we'll say that member over there doesn't like that group of members, that deputy there is anti-constables, anti-parish, this one's establishment, X, Y, and Z. And what we realise in these debates is that actually things are much more complicated. And that when we scratch beneath the surface, we do want what's best for Jersey, sir, Mum. And Mum, yeah, thank you. I just keep looking up now and again to check that you've not changed.
No, I'm still here, Deputy.
And it might be tempting to fall into that trap, which some have said this morning, is that the constables don't want any change. They're there just to represent the old order. But there is a counter-argument to that there is actually something quite radical about the potential for Jersey to devolve certain powers to the parishes that don't exist already. And it's a question of having the discernment to know what government does best, what should be centralised. And I'll hold my hand up and say that I still scratch my head and sometimes think, in a small island like Jersey where you have 12 parishes, and is it right to have 12 different recycling and refuse collection schemes? Because, of course, it's fine to say these are things that are traditionally done by the parishes, but if after 10, 15, 20 years, not every parish can even get to the point where they're collecting glass, let alone aluminium, cardboard and plastics, you might have to say, actually, something needs a bit of a kick up the rears, Mum. But I'm just conscious of what has and hasn't been allowed in the last few days. But I think there is actually that idea that some things can be delivered, if not at a parish level, certainly by a joint collective approach from the parishes. So certainly for my part in scrutiny, I'm completely open-minded to whatever mechanism that this regulation could take the shape of in future. As I've said previously, I'll be abstaining when it comes to the principles. That's probably an overly cautious approach. There's much in here that I'd be quite happy to support. It's for the rest of the panel to decide what they do on this, but certainly there will be a job of scrutiny to be done on this. I think it will be coming back probably at this assembly. We're more than happy to do that, but if it can be done at a point where there's more information about what is actually politically acceptable for a wider range of members, then it will certainly make our job of scrutiny not just easier, but actually hopefully more fruitful. Ma'am.
Deputy Ayer.
Thank you, ma'am. I do understand the concerns of the hospitality industry in the need for an update to the 1974 Jersey licensing law, and in the most part, welcome these changes which have been so long in the making. But I do have concerns about allocating the licensing process to the Gambling Commission. The Gambling Commission was initially set up with the purpose of overseeing internet gambling licenses. It was deemed necessary to have the appropriate oversight of these companies to ensure they were well-run organisations and conform to the law. To this end, the Assembly allocated reasonable sums to ensure that the Commission was set up swiftly. As far as I am aware, none of that initial funding has ever been repaid. I understand that the Minister holds the Gambling Commission in high regard and has no concerns about their ability to perform this function. As members are aware, I have some dealings with the Gambling Commission over the years, and I have an alternative viewpoint to the Minister. I've encountered numerous administrative failings by the Gambling Commission over the years, which I do not intend to regale members with at this juncture. But in case members are unaware, or indeed need reminding, in March of 2021, the Jersey Gambling Commission oversaw the largest corporate failure in gambling industry history when they had to withdraw a licence which they had issued to Bet Index Limited, trading as Football Index. This led to losses estimated at up to £100 million. The Jersey Gambling Commission deemed it reasonable to licence what was basically a Ponzi scheme. This action caused irreparable damage to the international standing of Jersey as a reputable gambling authority. The damage has been done, yet the Minister still maintains that they are a suitable organisation to oversee alcohol licensing. I would beg to differ. The most logical solution should have been to establish a new independent body to oversee this function, and then at a later date to absorb the issuance of gambling licence to the newly formed commission. I suggested this approach to the Minister, but he has chosen an alternative approach. In the report of P112, it states officers have begun consultation with industry and the Gambling Commission on a new simple fee structure, but this will be subject to public consultation before it is finished. But of course, this will not include the betting officers, of which nearly all of the funding for the Gambling Commission comes. Indeed, with only 14 betting officers remaining in Jersey, down from 29 before the Gambling Commission was established, gambling licence will still contribute more to the coffers of the Gambling Commission than all of the hospitality licence and off licence put together. It is noted that under Article 9 of this proposition, it provides for the charging of application and annual fees and for the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development to set the fees by order. The fees ought to be paid to the Commission unless the order specifies otherwise. This will lead to a rather peculiar situation whereby the new Alcohol and Gambling Commission will be directed as to how much they can charge for alcohol licensing, while being able to determine fees for bookmakers as they see fit. I do not think that the Gambling Commission is the best organisation to take on this role. And as Deputy Balash stated, they lack the experience of the Durex. I do not believe that this is the best way forward. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? No other member wishes to speak. I close the debate and I call upon the Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mum. I think, where to get started? I will actually pick up on Deputy Ayer's perspective about the, picking up on Deputy Balash's perspective about the licensing assembly. It was my understanding that, because that was one of the questions I asked, could we not keep the existing licensing assembly and just change everything around it? But because of the policy elements, it was deemed from advice that we received that that was not something that was possible. So the reason I asked for licensing appeals assembly is because I thought a nod to the heritage of the licensing assembly would be to keep it alive, but as an appeals body, rather than as the licensing assembly itself, because I was understood that the licensing assembly, we basically couldn't kind of strap on this new law around the licensing assembly. So that was how I had been advised. And that was why we ended up not looking at the licensing assembly. And I couldn't, as Deputy Ayer asked, create a new commission, as I explained to Deputy Ayer that evening, because it is government policy that we don't create new arm's length organisations. So that wasn't an option. Industry didn't wish for government to do this itself, but they wanted it to be something that was outside of government. And I will stand here and I still believe that 12 different licensing authorities is not going to provide a consistent environment that businesses in Jersey and new to Jersey would be able to navigate very easily. So that's how we ended up where we are. It wasn't any particular desire to use one specific organisation. It was trying to take everyone's views into account and come up with something that worked best. And it shows that sometimes when you compromise, you can actually make things harder. I am still, Mum, slightly confused about the perspective of scrutiny. And the reason I say this is I am on the scrutiny homepage here. And it says scrutiny. The role of scrutiny is to check, challenge and make recommendations to improve the policies, legislation and decisions of the government. And I cannot see, and I still, during the course of this debate, do not see a better opportunity for scrutiny to challenge and make recommendations to improve the policies and the legislation that I've laid before the Assembly today, ma'am. That to me seems to be at the heart of scrutiny's role. And I still think it very strange. So the scrutiny homepage is telling me that it is there to improve the policies and legislation. And that's what I was doing. I came here not wanting to take this beyond the first reading today. As I said at the outset, I did expect, apologies if I misunderstood, but I didn't expect scrutiny to call it in because it seemed like absolutely the appropriate thing to do. The ministers put one way forward down on paper. In this case, it's the connotables, but it could have been anybody else. It could have been an individual deputy, it could have been an individual constable, had put down a different way forward. And that's entirely reasonable. The right thing to do then, it felt to me, is that scrutiny is a third pair of eyes, an independent pair of eyes, could look at those two different routes and take their evidence as they do and see which they felt was the best. That, to me, still seems the best way forward. What is scrutiny if it is not there to be the critical friend and that third independent set of eyes? So I am still quite astounded by that perspective, but it is one which holds, and obviously I will not move this to the second reading. I never had any intention today of doing so. I'm just doing it in a slightly different way to the way that I expected, I hope, because I really hope that we do support these proposals. Deputy Curtis, Alex Curtis, I did take a long list of your questions, but they were complex and extensive. And in many ways, I would prefer, if Deputy doesn't mind, if we don't take this to the second reading, if the principles do pass, that in writing would be much easier, and then we can deal with them in that manner, I think would be best. I've explained why I didn't choose the existing licensing assembly as the administrative body. I think it is worth saying, I do think that the parishes, as represented by the Connotabs, significantly underestimate the work that the parishes don't do around licensing. Most of the work is undertaken by the Regulatory Directorate in government, and that is where applications start and finish their journeys today. And the parishes pick up the work of the Regulatory Directorate in department. They held their assemblies, and then it moves back on to the Regulatory Directorate, who are operating on behalf of the Licensing Assembly. So it may be that using the Regulatory Directorate is the better way forward, as they do the majority of the work today, is my understanding. I will reiterate that there's nothing in this proposal that takes anything from the existing parish roles. There never has been anything in this proposal which takes anything from the existing parish roles, and I'm really proud of that. Really proud that I set out upon this significant change, but really wanting to protect the roles of the parishes so that people could have a say on their individual areas. And I think it's one of the things that really does benefit this proposition as laid before the Assembly today. But those are my comments really on the debate that we've seen so far. I don't want to continue down that road because it gets into that administrative body, and that in many ways was the bit of the debate that I was hoping to avoid today, because I don't think that is the bit which needs to be discussed before the second reading. That is the bit which needs to be discussed during the second reading. What we have today before us is a really exciting piece of legislation that changes a 50-year-old system, a complex system with 7 categories, which are quite arbitrary categories in many, many ways. They are categories which don't fit modern life and don't fit the way we entertain ourselves and operate in this day and age. I think that is, by moving to 3 different licensing categories, we are creating what will be a far more simple and yet dynamic and flexible system than we have today. This is something that businesses across the island would wholeheartedly agree with is a good way forward. Jersey's hospitality sector, yes, the Connotabs St Helier is right. The Jersey hospitality sector is incredibly resilient. It does continue to go on, and it continues, in my mind, to strengthen. And we have some fantastic venues in town and elsewhere in the island, which serve islanders with smiles on their faces, and that's absolutely wonderful. But they're doing that while struggling with a system underneath them, which they do find difficult to navigate, and they do find complex, and they do find onerous. The example I gave of that premise, which has a licensed corridor, is a really good example. The example I gave of Beresford Street Kitchen paying higher license fees than major supermarkets is a really good example of the way the system doesn't work today and does need to be changed. I will take, if the Assembly can and does see it, and I'm heartened by what I've heard from even people who were talking about the reference back and people who were very much in favour of the Connotabs amendment, is that everyone did seem in the Assembly to be very much behind the principles. And so I do ask members to focus on that. We will take this back, and I will work not just with the Connotabs, but with others to try to bring forward an administrative body that people can be settled with. I don't think that administrative body can be 12 administrative bodies. I just do not fundamentally think that that is an appropriate way forward for this island when it comes to licensing. If you're one company that wants 3 different licenses in 3 different areas of the island, then you need to be dealing with one regime and not 3 different regimes and 3 different flavours of that regime. And so I think those are the things that the Assembly, I hope, can get behind. That simplification, that dynamism, and the fact that we will be creating a much more transparent system, which is just far, far easier to navigate. I would like to thank my officers who have worked on this for the past 3 years and more. It's been full of consultation. It's been a process been full of listening and trying to change things. There are amendments already in the draft before you that come from the Connotabs, which shows that I absolutely have been listening. There were accusations that I hadn't been listening. That can't be correct because there are amendments, there are changes that have been made and included that come directly from the committee itself. Please, I do hope we can continue to support the licensing, the hospitality sector. I think Jersey's hospitality sector has had a tough year. It's on the cusp of, I think, a much more successful year ahead. I know today is the day that Visit Jersey are holding their annual briefing. If it hadn't clashed with this, I would certainly be there today, speaking with hoteliers and restaurateurs and so on about their thoughts on the year ahead. But my understanding is that hotel bookings are looking up in every month but one this year, as far as forward booking data is concerned, and that we are seeing more travellers come by sea this month than has been travelling to Jersey by sea for the last 5 or 6 years. So I think we have turned a corner. After COVID, the hospitality sector can look forward to better days. And I really hope that by supporting these principles, we are giving a message from this Assembly to the hospitality sector that we are behind it, that we want it to succeed, and that we understand how hospitality plays a role, not just in the economy in the sense of the tourism economy, but it plays a role in keeping finance within the island. It plays a role within keeping young people in the island. It plays a role keeping older people in the island, because all of us engage with the hospitality sector in so many different ways. And if it wasn't for the hospitality sector, Jersey would be a much more diminished place. I know that the advertising that's going out from Visit Jersey over this year will be really pointing to the hospitality sector that we have, it will be pointing to the food offerings that Jersey has, the amazing range of restaurants that we have for such a tiny island, as those adverts will be saying. And I think that's absolutely the right thing to do, because one thing that Jersey has, which nowhere else of just 100,000 people has, is such a wide-ranging and vibrant hospitality sector. And I hope the Assembly can choose to support it by passing these principles, Ma'am. Thank you.
Do you call for the appel?
If you don't mind.
The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. And I'll ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have now cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the principles have been adopted. There were 40 votes for, 4 abstentions and 1 vote contre. Greffier.
The member voting contre, Deputy Balash, and those members abstaining, the Connotab, St Lawrence and Trinity, and Deputies Tadier and Wilson.
As a formality, Deputy Tadier, I'm required to ask if your panel wishes to scrutinise this matter.
Not at this juncture, ma'am.
Thank you. And Minister, you've already indicated that you don't wish to progress to second reading at this meeting. Standing orders dictate that we do need to set the meeting date. You've got 2 choices, really. It could be the 3rd of February or the 24th of February.
I'll take the 24th of February for this moment.
If members agree, that will be when the second reading will take place. Very well. We then move to the next item on the order paper, which is the registration of political groups, P115, lodged by Deputy Rob Ward, and the main respondent is the Chair of the Privileges and Procedures Committee. And I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to request the Privileges and Procedures Committee to A, to request the Jersey Electoral Authority, in consultation with the Privileges and Procedures Committee, to 1, produce a voluntary code of practice for all political groups that are standing candidates for the 2026 election. Such code will require all political groups who declare a shared political agenda, to include all political movements, collaborations or campaigns, to declare and publish A, the name of the political group, movement, collaboration or campaign, B, information about their policies, funding sources and decision-making structures, C, details of any donations above the threshold set out within the Public Elections Expenditure and Donations Jersey Law 2014, and D, financial records to be submitted in accordance with the terms of the Political Parties Registration Jersey Law 2008. 2, update the electoral candidate nomination form to require all candidates to formally state whether they are involved in any political groups for the election. And B, to request the Privileges and Procedures Committee, in consultation with the Jersey Electoral Authority, to bring forward all necessary legislative changes to require political groups to register under the Political Parties Registration Jersey Law 2008, and to bring these changes to the Assembly for approval before the end of January 2028.
Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I nearly called you Mum then. I was just getting used to it. Thank you, sir. So I can assure you that this is an exciting proposition to go over, even more exciting than the previous ones, and hopefully this will be a nice positive debate. I was thinking of perhaps even presenting in French after my conversations with one of the graphics. Mais je ne peux pas promettre de présenter entièrement en français. Je suis désolé. So I will continue. Enough of the light-hearted stuff, sir. This is serious. So this proposition seeks to strengthen transparency and accountability in our democratic process by addressing the growing presence of political groupings in Jersey. And it does so as we enter the run-up to our next election, a period where transparency around political organisation is vital for our democratic process. Over recent years, we have seen an increase in political parties and alongside them, informal alliances, groups of candidates campaigning together, sharing manifestos, election banners and literature, and presenting themselves as a unified front. Yet under current law, these groupings are not required to register or disclose any information about their funding, decision-making or governance. This creates a gap in transparency that risks undermining public trust. Our existing framework, the Political Parties Registration Law 2008, requires informal parties to register, appoint office holders and submit annual accounts. These rules are essential for openness and accountability. However, if a group of candidates campaigns collectively without registering as a party, there is no obligation to declare who funds them, how decisions are made, or even who they are. In an era where external influence and opaque funding have caused concern globally, we must act now to safeguard Jersey's democracy. We are a financial centre and with many rules and regulations. The gaps that exist around our political influence are a distinct contradiction. This proposal takes a two-step approach. First, a step towards immediate voluntary transparency. I recognise that we do not have time before election for legislative change. Instead, I propose the Jersey Election Authority, in consultation with the Privilege and Procedures Committee, produce a voluntary code of practice for all political groupings contesting the 2026 elections. Some very simple examples are in the appendix to the report. They can be produced using good practice that already exists. This code would require groups to publish their name, policies, funding sources, decision-making structures, and details of donations above legal threshold. It would also update the candidate nomination forms to declare any group affiliation. This is a proactive, positive step that empowers voters with clear information. This has the added advantage for the clarity for those who want to declare as truly independent, having the chance to make that abundantly clear. So I will finish the first part of the proposition by being clear that the voluntary nature means that if a grouping feels they do not want to declare, they can do so and explain the reasons why. Again, promoting debate and transparency over the structure of our politics. The second part of the proposition introduces future legislative change. I further request the PPC bring forward necessary amendments to the Political Parties Regulation Law to require all political groups to register formally in the next Assembly term, with changes approved by January 2028. This will close the loophole and ensure consistent standards for transparency. So I'll finish by going through, why does this matter? Let me give you some real-world experiences. In the United Kingdom, investigations into campaign financing revealed that unregistered political groups were able to channel significant funds into targeted advertising without clear accountability. This raised serious concerns about fairness and influence. In the United States, the rise of so-called super PACs has allowed vast sums of money to flow into elections from undisclosed donors, creating a perceptions and sometimes reality of undue influence over policy decisions. Across Europe, there have been cases where foreign entities have covertly funded political movements, undermining sovereignty and democratic integrity. These examples show that transparency is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Jersey is not immune to these risks. While we have not faced such scandals, the absence of clear rules for political groupings leaves the door open. We cannot wait for a problem to arise before we act. Sir, this is not about restricting collaboration or stifling political debate. Indeed, sir, I would encourage collaborative working. It is about fairness, openness, and protecting the integrity of our elections. Voters deserve to know who is behind the messages they receive and the candidates they support. Transparency builds trust, and trust is the foundation of democracy. The financial and staffing implications are minimal. Drafting a voluntary code can be achieved with existing resources, and legislative change can be an extension of current law and for the next iteration of this Assembly. So I urge members to support this proposition, and let us take a clear, sensible step towards ensuring that Jersey's democracy remains robust, transparent, and free from undue influence. I look forward to an open and thoughtful debate. Sir, I move the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded? Yes. Thank you.
Can I ask a question of the Solicitor General when appropriate?
Yes, you may.
Attorney General.
No, the Solicitor General still.
Solicitor General, I think.
Or Acting Attorney General, but not yet Attorney General.
Well, may I congratulate the Solicitor General on his impending appointment. I knew I shouldn't have bet on the other guy. The question relates to funding, and which I think is at the heart of the proposition, and particularly the Public Elections and Expenditure and Donations Law 2014, because I think it would be helpful to understand the current legal position regarding funding of independent candidates. Particularly by organisations of which they are not a member, but where they may nevertheless receive support from an independent grouping, a third-party organisation. It could be Value Jersey, or it could be trade unions. I don't know. But the Section 10 of the 2014 law refers to third-party funding and states that a third party cannot spend in aggregate more than half of what the candidate can spend. So, I question is, does this mean that cumulatively, if the third party is supporting, let's say, 10 candidates, they can spend 10 times that sum of money on the election? And could the Solicitor General perhaps fill in his understanding of that law in this context?
Yes.
Yes, well, I'm grateful to the Deputy who gave me the benefit of advance notice of his questions. I think we start probably slightly earlier. I think the first question is whether a movement, whether Article 10 would capture spending by a, quote, non-party movement. The answer to that is yes, it would, but only if this movement or group met the definition of third party in Article 9, 1A or B of the 2014 law. It might be helpful if I just read that provision. It provides the meaning of a third party, and it says a third party in relation to an election is a person who is not a candidate in the election and who is not acting with the express or implied consent of a candidate in the election who incurs expenses for the supply or use of goods or the provision of services, or B, 2 or more persons acting together, none of whom is a candidate in the election, and who are not acting with the express or implied consent of a candidate in the election, who incur expenses for the supply or use of goods or the provision of services which are used during the regulated period, and that's a period before the actual polling day. And so the key words there are, quote, not acting with the express or implied consent of a candidate in the election. That has to be met for them to be third parties for the purposes of the law. If they are acting with a candidate's express or implied consent, then they aren't third parties, and the election expenses which they incur form part of the election candidate's election expenses and must not send the aggregate amount of the candidate's election expenses over the statutory ceiling, which is set out in Article 4 of the law. The deputy then asked, well, does this mean that cumulatively, if the third party is supporting 10 candidates, it can spend 10 lots of what the candidates can spend? Well, I think it's actually half of what the candidate can spend. The answer to that is no. The definition of election in the law, as it's going to be from the 1st of February, as amended, is this: election means an election for the office of senator, deputy, or connétable. In my view, the correct interpretation of that is that there is only one election in which 3 different classes of elected office are, as it were, up for grabs. But there is only one election. Article 10.1 of the law sets an upper limit on how much a third party can spend, quote, for an election. It doesn't use the word for a candidate. And because there is only one election, a third party may incur election expenses in respect of more than one candidate, but those expenses in aggregate must not exceed the statutory maximum, which is 1/2 of the total amount of an election that an election candidate can spend. So the answer to that second question is shortly no. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, so could I ask one follow-up that just arises from that final point?
Yes.
The question, the Solicitor General defined the election as the defining character, if you like. However, there are 3 different classes of states member in the election, each with different spending limits. Does that mean that when the spending limit of this third party would be the upper limit, if you like, or a sum of the 3 different categories? If they were supporting people in 3 different categories, it could be a potentially grey area.
Well, once the amendments to the law come into force, of course, senators will be back in the mix, and the allowance for senators under Article 4 is somewhat higher than the amount for deputies. I'm just trying to find it. The amounts will change as follows. A candidate's election expenses, according to the amended Article 4, must not exceed, A, in relation to a candidate for election for the office of senator, the total of £4,146, and then there's a per capita addition, 13 pence per head of those entitled to vote. And then in relation to a candidate for election for the office of deputy or connétable, a total of £2,517, and the addition 13 pence per voter. The provision or the limit that's placed on third-party payments or election expenses is this. A third party's election expenses for an election shall not exceed in the aggregate 1/2 of the maximum that will be allowed to a candidate in the election by virtue of Article 4. And I take that to mean that it'll be 1/2. First of all, you ask which office is the candidate standing for. What's the maximum that candidate can spend in election expenses? And 1/2 of that is the maximum that the third party financer can can spend in election expenses. So it's a higher figure if it's a senatorial candidate. It's a lower figure if it's a deputy or a connoisseur. But I mean, we're talking about modest sums. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Solicitor. Chair of PPC.
Thank you, sir. Although the proposition from Deputy Rob Ward requires action of PPC, implementation of this proposition will truly fall to the Jersey Electoral Authority, albeit the JEA will consult PPC on the work to be undertaken. PPC itself has not taken a view on the proposition, but I hope members have read the comments we have presented on behalf of the JEA. The JEA has highlighted the need for transparency at election time, and that it is vital voters understand whether or not a candidate is standing as an independent. But the JEA has indicated it is not certain that Deputy Ward's proposition is the right approach. The JEA has recognised that concerns were expressed during the 2022 elections similar to those highlighted by Deputy Ward, but the JEA was satisfied that all relevant declarations had been made under the Public Elections Expenditure and Donations Law, and indeed it is satisfied that the law ensures that everyone is required to make full declarations about the funding of their campaign. The JEA is undertaken to engage with PPC about any gaps or issues there may be with the legislation, but it does not consider a voluntary code to be practicable or policeable. There will be a code of conduct for candidates this year, as there was in 2022, and the JEA has also undertaken to review the content of the nomination form to see whether any form of additional declaration about affiliation with a group or movement should be included. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Chief Minister.
Just a very quick question for the Attorney General designate, sir. And I have some sympathy with this because I'm trying to reconcile how political groups can act almost in the same way as a party but be exempt from declaring expenses. And from reading the comments that have been provided by the JE, lodged by PPC, I think it sort of says that it's covered under the relevant provisions in the law. But I just wanted some advice about the definition of a political group in the proposition, because I'm not sure when it refers to include political movements, collaborations or campaigns. I'm not sure what a collaboration is. I mean, for example, if Deputy Gorst and Deputy Mezek and let's say Deputy Rennet had an epiphany and said, let's work together and help each other out at the elections, does that fall under the proposition of a collaboration?
So what's your question, Chief Minister?
Miracle is what you're looking for.
What is the definition of a political group in the proposition?
I'm not sure that's a question for the Solicitor General. I'm afraid to say you're left with what the proposition says, and you may, what you understand may be informed by what the proposer says in his speech to you, but I don't think I can assist in relation to what
it was specifically in relation to the word collaboration.
I'm afraid to say they're ordinary English words, and it's not for me to give you guidance on what words like collaboration mean. It's a matter for members to consider. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I will pick up on this point raised by the Chief Minister because it is something that has been considered by me and in fact causes me concern. The general, and I note the position of the JEA, I think it's actually a very sensible position, but the general question here is why should political groups be required to register under what is a political party's registration law? The proposition is suggesting that political campaign groups, I believe, should be included under the umbrella of political parties, despite not being political parties. So the proposal suggests that this proposition promotes transparency, and generally no problem with that, that's generally a good thing. But unfortunately, I think it's going the wrong way about it. And in fact, it promotes the suppression of freedom of expression, and it's an intrusion on privacy. And I'm sure the Deputy didn't intend this, and I really need to explain why I think this proposition's in breach of two fundamental human rights principles while promoting red tape. In breach, contrary to the actual one of the priorities of the Common Strategic Policy. But apart from that, yeah, it's, well, I say it comes from a positive place, I'm sure. But let's come back to the matter of transparency. So we've had this discussion. Electoral candidates already are required to disclose significant funding sources under the Public Election Expenditure and Donations Law 2014, which already is administered by the Jersey Electoral Authority. So, so if in fact you've got some sort of group that is saying, hey, Moz, will you stand on this platform and we'll give you this much for your campaign, I think that's pretty well covered. I think what the Acting Attorney General said, and I believe there's a reason this, if you've got a general group and it's saying, an only group, so well, I mean, what is a political group? So you've got a group that has a kind of political platform or some campaign objective, and they are saying within the community, we think that new candidates should adopt this particular objective or these proposals or do these certain things, that basically these people should be disclosing, finding accounts, disclosing funding sources and all these things. It caused me really a bit of concern because I actually was the chair of a campaign group, which just was made up of a bunch of neighbours who felt that the development of St Brelard's Bay was, in fact, it wasn't just neighbours outside that group as well, but they just felt that there was insensitive development going on of a particular area that they felt was an asset to tourism in the island, and they felt that people should be doing more to protect that area. Now, are they a political group? I'm sorry, who says? Why? But that's the point. What makes a political group? When the church takes a stance on the assisted dying law, are they a political group? Should they be disclosing all their accounts? Should the Women's Institute? And that's the thing that concerns me. Now, I have up to recently been a member of the Machinery of Government sub-panel, and that's been doing a lot of work on lobbying and a lobbying code. And it was not an easy discussion because you actually had to define who a lobbyist is and what lobbyist is. Now, we ended up with a code to support states members being transparent, but we didn't quite go as far as to say, right, all lobbyists should do this, all lobbyists should do that, because there comes a point when you've actually got to say, are you actually interfering in people's ability to express political opinions and ask people to promote them? Are you actually making it harder or even scarier? And I fear that this proposition may well, although coming from a right place, may be doing that. And at the same time, not addressing a real serious problem. There are flaws in two laws relating to elections that aren't actually helping with transparency. And one of those indeed is the political parties registration law. And the other is the law that I mentioned, the political election expenditure donations law. And this is why, because basically the political election expenditure and donations law 2014 applies to successful candidates. Nobody at the time they stand has to say, oh, by the way, did you know on the payroll of, whoever? And then actually the same way political parties, similar thing. They don't have to right at the front of their campaign say, or even put in their literature, we are funded by this group or union or whatever. And so I think that if you want transparency, do more work there. And that will actually mean you need to amend some laws. But the other thing, of course, is the actual enforcement of these laws. And now, you know, I know that a couple, I didn't make myself perhaps popular with a couple of party leaders when I pointed out that the filing of accounts under the political parties law was late. Two political parties hadn't actually put them in time. What were the consequences? Well, there weren't really any, but that's the thing. It's the way in which these actual laws are enforced. What happened when an enormous number of electoral candidates were discovered not to have complied with the elections law in terms of disclosing, filing their expenses forms by a certain day? Well, they were kind of generally forgiven for getting it wrong. So I come back to this position, that, and here's the other thing, not-for-profit organisations are actually regulated. I don't know if people are aware of this. They think just charities are regulated. Well, they are regulated in a certain way. So there are certain, I think that the attention should actually be on these laws, not on potentially drafting a code or asking the Jersey Electoral Authority to do so, that actually could, you know, strike terror in any kind of bunch of people who just want to get together and, you know, are concerned about a particular issue and want to raise it with, you know, candidates. So, but there does need to be perhaps a bit more in the way of the amendment of laws, a bit more in the way of, so to assist the Jersey Electoral Authority in apportioning potential adopted campaign expenses if you've actually got a group that comes up with a whole kind of campaign that just goes round to people and saying, oh, would you like to stand on this? Then there probably does need to be some sort of apportionment of expense there, perhaps if they're adopting it. But I still see some great difficulties there. So I'm not going to support this amendment for those reasons. Proposition.
Thank you, Reneth.
So I'm going to take a slightly different tack, because I think I need to begin this speech with an important announcement. Some of you may have heard the rumours, and indeed it is true. I want to announce here and now that I have decided to launch a new political party. I mean a movement to try and get Jersey back on track. There is, sir, a gaping hole in the political marketplace. At the moment, we have Reform Jersey, who proudly represent the working class. We have Advanced Jersey, who represent that elusive body of liberal conservative opinion in Jersey. And we have Value Jersey, who represent that large talent pool of failed election candidates at the last election. But there is one group clearly not represented yet, and members will understand who I'm talking about when I say that the name of my new political movement is Premium Jersey. Sir, Premium Jersey is not a party, but a movement that exists to serve the interests of the very wealthy. Now, I know there will be questions about how Premium Jersey are funded. In a democracy, that is only to be expected. But obviously, it wouldn't be appropriate for privacy reasons to explain where Premium Jersey gets its funding. All I'll say is we welcome donations, minimum £500. So I jest, of course, regarding Premium Jersey. And I note, actually, that there are two problems with attempting jokes in a speech. One is they're not funny. But the second is it doesn't age well. I'm reminded of Barack Obama's final address at the end of his presidency to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the next presidential election was going to be between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and Obama quipped, "Next year, someone else will be standing in this spot, and at this stage, it's anyone's guess who she will be." The audience laughed their heads off. We're not laughing now. Having put all that to one side, I do think the issues raised by Deputy Ward's proposition concerning non-party political groupings are real and important. Politics is about power, and there is a very close connection between money and power, which is why there are laws about election spending in every jurisdiction. The overall aim of our laws and rules around elections is to ensure a level playing field. We can see in other jurisdictions like the United States what happens when election spending runs out of control. And Deputy Rob Ward made some allusions to this. The incredible expenditure we see in American elections today was actually created by a legal ruling. An interpretation of law, which is one of the reasons why I was keen to get the clarification from the Acting Attorney General. It was created by a Supreme Court ruling that allowed what are known as super PACs, that's political action committees, super PACs, to raise and spend unlimited funds for independent political advocacy, so long as they don't coordinate with candidates. The vote on the Supreme Court was 5-4. And that split ruling struck down century-old prohibitions on funding by third-party organisations. And the results we've seen led to an explosion of spending in elections, with billions now being spent by super PACs in every election. Once that door is kicked open, it's very hard to shut it. And in a neat little catch-22, any attempt to bolt the door now is met with massive campaign funding from super PACs to resist that change. Now, of course, Jersey is not remotely in this situation. Our elections feature modest spending limits. Albeit, I will note that they do still unavoidably lead to some filtering of candidates, particularly in the senatorial election, where not everyone will be able to afford to spend at the levels necessary to take that on. We do need to be vigilant. It serves democracy for there to be limits on spending, as we have, and that we keep in mind the potential for loopholes, which I think is what Deputy Rob Ward's proposition addresses. And the biggest worry, I think, is that spending by groups that are not political parties could bypass our spending limits. I think I have taken some reassurance from what the Acting Attorney General has said. I think the points that have been raised so far, Deputy Scott's point about lobby groups and so on, I think my understanding of the Acting Attorney General's comments was that they wouldn't be relevant because for the purposes of elections, I think I heard him say that a third party is defined in the law and would not capture a group that wasn't spending money on an election. So it does narrowly concern elections, and that is what this proposition, I think, is mostly concerned with as well. So coming to Deputy Ward's proposition in a bit more detail, I think it engages this question of the relationship between support for a candidate's position and funding. I have to say, I'm not sure that his proposed solutions are addressing the issues that I've highlighted in the way that will solve the problems. And I say that from a position of support for the principle of having this debate. I do think there is a slight paranoia around the question of non-party groups. And I just want to sort of flesh out some thoughts on that, because however we approach this, we should be mindful of the complex and unique political ecology of the island. We have a hybrid system. We don't define it as such, but it is a hybrid system, I think. We have a couple of political parties and a large number of independents. There are those who want to see more political parties, and I would point out that one of the ways to get to political parties might be to start with movements, start with political groupings that might at some point evolve into something more. that might be what Value Jersey have in mind. I have no idea. In Guernsey, the most recent election featured a political movement called Future Guernsey. And again, we don't know whether that is going to materialise into a political party. But I don't think, oh, sorry, yes, of course it has. It has actually, yes. But in a way, that makes my point, which is that we wouldn't want to take actions which I think stifled the formation of relatively fluid political movements, because it is out of that sort of thing that political parties might evolve, or we might test ideas and find that they don't lead to a political party, and that would also be an interesting outcome. So part A, as Deputy Rob Ward said, would set up a voluntary code of conduct. I'm in two minds about this. Given that it's voluntary, and given that in practice it does seem like it would be quite hard to enforce, but it is voluntary. It's in that category of it could be useful, it might not. It's hard to tell. I mean, I think I'm probably erring not to support it, I'm afraid, but I will listen to the debate and see whether I can be persuaded. Part B asks PPC to make political movements register with the JEA. I think if this had been worded a slightly less, slightly less directly and as an instruction, I think it might have been an interesting one for PPC to explore, because I think they might have come up with options that were slightly more sensitive to situations. I do feel that it's quite a dogmatic, not dogmatic, that's the wrong word, it's quite a strict instruction to PPC, and so I do have some problems with that. But I do think that the issue raised is an important one, and that we might see in the future elections, I think it's even happened once or twice before, but we might see more of banners purporting to support a group of candidates in an election that have not been put there by the candidates, but put there by people who wish to support them because they have signed up to various policy positions. It might be to a whole movement, it might be to a manifesto that has been produced by a group, it might be towards a sort of a green manifesto or whatever. And I think that exploring where the limits to funding of that kind of thing lie is something we should all be thinking about. I think, as I say, I'm reasonably reassured by the acting Attorney Generals that there is no gaping loophole at the moment. I do think, and I would urge, that the JEA, in conjunction with possibly with the acting AG and PPC, might want to make very clear in publicity for the next election to third parties what the situation is, because I don't think that many people will have been aware, certainly I wasn't, of those clarifications that have been offered today, and I think it would be useful for third parties for their own protection in a way, to make sure that they don't go outside those spending limits. As a final comment, moving back to where I began, I'd just like to say to those members of the Assembly who are worried that premium Jersey might not make the impact it deserves, perhaps because it needs a better leader, let me reassure those members that regardless of the election, I'm sure our supporters will still end up running the island one way or another.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. And sorry to disappoint Deputy Ranov, but a political movement that exists to support the interests of the super wealthy in Jersey has existed for many decades in this island, and it has existed since the demise of the Jersey Progressive Party in the 1950s. And one of the reasons, sir, that they actually disbanded as a political party was because they enjoyed the lack of accountability that came with that, but they did continue to operate and associate in various forms in the years after that. So I think that this proposition is actually really simple, and quite a few red herrings have been raised so far, especially if you're looking at the specific wording of this proposition. The aim of the proposition, sir, is to make sure that everybody who is partaking in an election for the purpose of influencing the outcome of that election and therefore the laws and policies that the people of Jersey have to live under afterwards, is conducted with some kind of basic level playing field that seeks to eliminate loopholes that will allow people to buy elections. So it was one of my political heroes, President Franklin Roosevelt, who said that government by organised money is no better than government of organised mob. And that's why we have spending limits in our elections, because nobody should be able to buy elections, and the public are well entitled, and I completely reject the comment made by Deputy Scott earlier on about the intrusion of privacy when it comes to trying to influence an election outcome and the laws and policies that the people of the island live under. In that election spending, there should not be such a thing as privacy. We all have to declare where we get the funding for our election campaigns from, whether they're self-funded or whether they come from donations. And there's a regime for that, which, as has been tested with questions to the Acting Attorney General and what we all know, having been through election campaigns before, does have some good standards in it. There are the standards that apply to independent candidates, and there are also legal standards that apply to political parties that we have to abide by. We have to file accounts with the Royal Court every year, which anyone is allowed to go and look at, and you can see how much we spent in a year. You can see where we got it from. In an election, we don't just have to publish our election expenses after that election, but if we receive substantial donations before the election, we have to declare them. There is a specific form we have to fill in. It's legally provided for, and it is a criminal offence for us not to fill in that form. So if we get a substantial donation before polling day, we have to declare it, and the public are entitled to know about it, and if that influences whether they vote for us or don't vote for us, that's a matter for them, but at least they've got the knowledge to arm themselves with them there. But so what this proposition exists for is the worry that there are significant loopholes in this, where people who are forming political groups that are standing candidates for the election, that's the key line. So all this stuff about the St Brellard's Bay group or the Church or Women's Institute is completely irrelevant, because that's not what they exist for. It's for the purpose of standing candidates in the election. So if we as a political party decided that we were going to forego our party registration, because let's be honest, the only thing that we get for it is the words Reform Jersey on the ballot paper. There's no other advantage that comes to registration. It's all obligation by having to file accounts and provide that level of transparency. If we just decided we weren't going to do that, we would still operate in exactly the way that we do now. It wouldn't be a third party, because it would be a mix of people who are supporters and members outside and members who are elected as well, and found ways of organising our promotion, some of which is elections, a lot of which is not election related to. It's about management and promotion outside election times. All of a sudden, a very large part of that transparency would disappear, and nobody would be able to hold us to account for it. And that is wrong. We're happy to say that it's wrong and happy to abide by those standards of transparency, and others should too. Deputy Renouf, I think, made a mistake when he talked about movements potentially becoming parties and not wanting to stop that. But so in most instances, that moving from movement to party has happened outside the election cycle or well enough in advance of it. Reform Jersey was a movement before it became a political party. I believe that was the same for the Liberal Conservatives, who started as a movement, became a party, and have since changed their name. The example he mentioned in Guernsey, the movement that predated that did have to register under Guernsey's laws and did have to file election expenses, because Guernsey had gone a step further than us in this. So even though that movement, which has now moulded into, I believe it's called Forward Guernsey, had to do that in the Guernsey system. So I think Deputy Renouf may have missed that in his comments there. But As Deputy Ward said in his opening for this, it is extremely important that we have transparency on attempts to influence the outcomes of elections, where the money is coming from, what it's being spent on, not just whether it's election literature, but entertaining and other things like that, whether people are going and receiving hospitality that's being paid by somebody. It ought to be clear on that, why that's coming to where it is and for what it is for. Just after the last election, sir, I did discover, and I was able to discover this because it was a legal requirement for this to be published, that another political party that had contested that election, not one that's still represented in this assembly, had received a donation for £25,000 from one individual. That's on public record and members can go and check it. I think, sir, that may have come under greater scrutiny had that party had greater success in that election. Because when you look into it, you may wish to ask questions about what that relationship was, why such a generous donation was made. You can bypass that now, sir, under the current rules by blurring the lines between what is simply a movement or a group or a political party, and that's not right. But, sir, if members of the public wish to form quasi-parties and campaign in elections to seek to get elected, to seek to get their people in, to seek to influence the laws and the policies that the public of the island live under, then they should be subject to that level of transparency, as every one of us in this chamber had to do, whether as a genuine independent or as a member of a political party. We've had to do it, so too should others, and I don't think there's anything particularly radical about that. And yes, okay, it would be difficult to police in the form of a voluntary code of practice, but then it does at least empower the public to say, this is a pretty basic requirement for you to be transparent about your funding like everybody else. Why aren't you abiding by it? That question, if it doesn't have a good answer, can arm the public to know how they vote in that election, and that can only be a good thing. So more transparency is a good thing, sir. This is why I think the proposition should be adopted.
Thank you, Deputy.
Scott, I just wonder if the Deputy would give way, just so answer for a point of clarification.
Would you give way?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes.
The Deputy used the term about having a political movement stand a candidate. And I just wondered if he might, because he's clearly got an idea about what that entails, how you know that they are standing a candidate, you know, as opposed to just funding. I just wondered if he could just clarify on that distinction. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question. She hesitated in midway.
Okay, is standing, is it something aside from actually giving funds towards an election that's already covered by the law? And if it is, how?
Well, sir, my contention is that it's not necessarily all captured by the law, that it is possible, sir, to do lots of spending on promotion for a movement or a group that is not directly spotlighting a particular candidate, but is clearly going to have a reputational impact on that candidate. They're obviously hoping it would be a positive one. It's very possible to do that, sir. Reform Jersey could, if we were lucky enough to have the funds, spend tens of thousands of pounds outside of the regulated period for an election to promote the party and branding, not specifically candidates, but that would obviously have a beneficial impact on the reputation of those candidates, or at least we would be seeking for it to have that impact. Under the law, we'd have to declare it because we have to file accounts, so it's covered, but another group would not have to do so. So that's the distinction I was making there, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Jones.
Sir, putting aside Deputy Renouf's jokes, the last two speakers have answered a lot of my questions that I would have put to the proposer. So,
thank you very much. Does anyone else wish to speak on this proposition? Constable Greville.
Sir, thank you. I'm reminded of the 1985 comedy film Brewster's Millions, starring Richard Pryor. The premise of the film was he was going to inherit an obscene amount of money if he could give away a certain portion of it without gaining any assets, not betting it, not giving it away. And he did so, sir, by standing for election because he realised that's the easiest way to throw away an awful lot of money. And of course, sadly for him, he became President of the United States as a direct result. And of course, that implied, did it not? It implied that you could buy that presidency. And I am always frightened by the sorts of lobbies that are active in that country, the gun lobby, the oil lobby, etc., and the influence they have. And anything that is declared publicly and transparently, I think, is a good thing within a political system. And I hope that Brewster's Millions never comes true. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Alexander. Does anyone else wish to speak on the proposition? No one else wishes to speak. I'll call upon Deputy Ward to reply.
Thank you, sir. Oh, speed is of the essence, marvellous. I'll be really quick as well. I have to say to the Council of Group, I've never seen Brewster's Millions, but I will go home and watch it at some point. It sounds very interesting. So thank you for everyone who's spoken. It's very simple. We seem to have been a little obsessed with the funding. It's a little bit more than that. As I say, it's not about the price tag. Deputy Renouf, I thank him. You've got to be careful with a political party name. The world catches up on you. I mean, you can call yourself whatever you want. When you said premium, I heard premier, and I was thinking, you know, always a good night's sleep. And who doesn't like a premier in breakfast? There we go. I think the points you raise is, I understand. I hope you can support this because it's simply, I think the voluntary nature of this is the point of the first part. We cannot change it straight away, but we have an election coming up. And I do have concerns. I think there are genuine concerns across the Assembly about what's happened in regards to those elections and the transparency of those standing. And the key point is it is about standing in elections. If you stand candidates as a group. And I'll come back to that when I talk to Deputy Scott's point. And so therefore, I think the key points there are that voluntary code, if you like, it's got to be self-regulating because it's voluntary. And I think it will be the electorate that regulates that. Because if we vote for this today and it has to happen, and there are obvious political groupings who stand together on a leaflet that's got the same name on it, be whatever that name is, you know, the even better way, the discount jersey, yellow label jersey, whatever you want to call yourself, it's absolutely up to you. But I think the electorate will want to know, what are you standing for? What are you going to do together? Why are you standing together? Why are you not declaring that? And I think that is the self-regulating part of that. And then the second part for the next Assembly, it doesn't have to be complicated, and it does say necessary legislative change. So if PPC find only small amounts of legislative change I can't say the word, legislative change is necessary, then that's fine. And I think that is very important when we talk about necessary. Chair of PPC, PPC have no view. I think I was slightly disappointed in JEA's comments because I think this is a lot simpler than they're saying. I think there were two. I thought to myself, I better put a couple of examples of codes of practice. This is going to take me forever. I searched under codes of practice and about 500 came up. I selected a couple in 2 or 3 minutes and put them at the end of my comments paper just to make the point. Very easy to find. There's a lot that already exists out there. It can easily be adapted, so I don't think that it's such a big thing. And this is beyond spending laws because the spending laws happen after the election. After the election, we declare spending. Everyone declares it. This is about the run-up to an election and political campaigning together. And the same to the Chief Minister. It is about post-election. In terms of definition, that's the point of the voluntary code. The voluntary code, to some extent, is to draw out what those political groupings look like. People may have their names together. I can remember in not the last election, but the election before, we had 3 members of the Assembly who stood together with their names together on the banners, with no political party saying, vote for the team. Now, that's fine, but I think that is 3 people working together as a political grouping. And they need to be declaring honestly about what's behind them, what is their shared value that you're voting for? What you get from those 3 people that is a shared value? Because I think that's what the electorate wants to know. and how they work together in forming a government. So that's the reason for the voluntary code, Chief Minister. As Deputy Scott, I'm not asking to register under the umbrella of a political party in the voluntary code. I'm asking PPC in the next iteration to look at how that would work and what necessary legislative changes to recognise political groupings that will have influence on the election, that will stand together and need to show their transparency. Now, if that forms a political party, that's fine. And it was telling that the deputy said some sort of group. In a democracy, for elections, where you are choosing the people who are going to form the laws under which you live, some sort of group isn't good enough to me. You've got to be really clear in terms of what type of group are you, where are your influences, and what do you stand for. I also think it is much more powerful to do that because it's honest with the electorate, and that is much needed. Again, so I suffer from the not being able to read my own handwriting. And the key is in this part, it is those who stand candidates. So, for example, the St Billard's Bay group, they're not going to stand candidates. They might lobby, they might go to people and say this is an important issue, and if you're in St Billard's, of course you will. But if the St Billard's Bay said, right, we've got our candidate for election, and we're all going to get behind them, and we're going to put 4 candidates up, they're working as a political grouping, if you stand candidates. Because we want to know what you stand for. And I think what is scary, scarier than to say to people you need to declare where your alliances are hidden alliances. Alliances that only appear after the election when people form groups together to form a government. And if that happens, I think that is much scarier because there were some influences there and we need to be very, very aware of those. The transparency at the beginning is far less scary than that happening at the end. Deputy Renouf, I mentioned about his... and I think he mentioned loopholes, and the loopholes are the key. It's not just spending. I understand about the spending, that is key. You know, I want to resist, but I can't. Saying, you know, what is the price of a tin of beans? You know, who's paying for the beans? You know, and when they're given away and can't be used because the labels have been removed, what a waste of money. Someone needs to be accountable for all those tins of beans that had to be thrown in the bin because they had no labels on, so you couldn't tell whether there were any allergens in them. You have to think these things through, you know, and I think we need to know about that. I'll be very quick, sir. It is a hybrid system what we have. Movements have started. I don't think this puts people off being a movement. It might help focus it. It has happened before. Political parties do form from that. It may well be that you have a go as a movement. It doesn't work. You don't have to go through the process of political party. It might be a good trial before political parties collapse and you don't have to do all the admin. But I do raise the issue of accountability. The key word there is accountability. If you bring forward, if you work together, how can you be accountable? If you say at the election, oh, we're going to work together, but actually we're not actually together. So later on, if you form government and you fall out or something doesn't work, you can say, that's actually not us. It's not us anymore. And I don't think that works for the electorate. I don't think that's the right thing to do. And if you're independent, that's absolutely fine. Independence is independence. You put things forward, you form allegiances. I work with people across the Assembly. I always have in scrutiny and now in government. Okay, we have to work together. We get that. You can do that as an independent. You can do that as a part of a political party if we have intelligent and thoughtful politics across this Assembly. And I think some of our debates on the assisted dying have shown what we can do when we really try. Deputy Mezek, he makes some good points, of course. And I think the phrase was about influencing the outcome. We need to know before our next election which groupings are working together to influence the outcome of those elections with candidates. And if we don't know that, we cannot truly say that we have an open and transparent election. And that's what I'd like to see us happen. I think that's everybody's comments that I've been through. And I would just say that this is a simple proposition. It's about adopting a voluntary code. If you look at the voluntary code as a political group and say, that's not for us, we don't believe we have to do it, you're right, it cannot be policed. That's the point of a voluntary code. But it will be policed by the electorate. If you are standing together in, I can't think of a political party name, yellow label Jersey. We are, yellow label Jersey. We're standing together as a movement called Yellow Label Jersey. And we vote for this voluntary code. The first question on Hustings will be, why aren't you declaring as a political party? And if that can be answered, then that's absolutely fine. But there's a voluntary code there to look at, to give transparency to people about your funding, who's behind you, what is the political influence behind you. If there are people in the background driving your political influence and you are standing as a group, that needs to be declared. And that's where this comes from. The second part is for the next iteration of the Assembly. I know, I'm also honest about that, and I realise that if the next iteration of the Assembly PPC decide, actually, we've had a look at legislative change and we don't want it, it won't happen. I'm realistic about that. I don't dream that anything that we do in this Assembly would be that influential next time, because it can all be changed. However, it's there. It's there for discussion, and there's time there, and it's something for PPC to look at, and they will be fresh from an election to have seen what's happened. So I think that would be very important. And finally, sir, anything that we do that puts us apart from some of the influences in elections across the world is better for us as a democracy, it's better for us as a society and an economy, and it's better for the electorate of Jersey, and it sends a message out to say, we want to be transparent, we want you involved in the elections, please vote, and let's know what you're voting for. So I urge members, please support both parts of the proposition, and I call for the appels.
Thank you, Deputy. The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return.
Could
Deputy
we ask
Chairman.
if it will be taken in parts, or it's all at one side?
It's nice for you, Deputy Ward. Do you want to take them in parts, A and B, or together?
Actually, sir, I don't, if that's okay. I'd rather vote for it together, because I think one leads to the other. It's nothing, not being difficult, but yeah, let's keep it together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Members are invited to return to their seats. I'll ask the greffier to open the voting. Four members have the opportunity of casting their votes. I'll ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce the proposition has been adopted. 25 votes for, 17 votes contra.
Can I vote? Thank members for that. Marvellous.
Can we have the votes, please, sir?
Yes, of course.
Those members voting for the Connaught Harbour, St Lawrence, St Peter, St Martin, St John, St Clement, Grouville, St Juan, St Mary and St Saviour. And Deputies Southern, Tadier, Doublé, Lehegra, Rob Ward, Owls, Mesick, Coles, Porre, Miles, Renouf, Feltham, Jeune, Stevenson, Kovac and Catherine Curtis. And those members voting contre, the Connaught Harbour, St Bernard and Trinity, and Deputies Luce, Ayer, Gorst, Farnham, Balash, Scott, Rose Binet, Miller, Howell, Tom Binet, Ferry, Alex Curtis, Barbara Ward, Wilson and Andrews.
Next item is the Draft Elections Amendment Commencement Act, lodged by the Chair of the Privileges and Procedures Committee. The main respondent is the Chair of the Corporate Service Scrutiny Panel. I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Elections Amendment Jersey Commencement Act 2000. The states make this act under Article 28 of the Elections Jersey Amendment Law 2025.
Chair of PPC.
Thank you, sir. This Act provides for the Elections Jersey Amendment Law 2025 to come into force on the 10th of February 2026. That law makes several administrative changes to the extant law as approved by the adoption of P 28/2025 as amended on the 24th of June 2025 and is designed to improve the electoral system for candidates, voters and those tasked with running the process. For clarity, this does not enact the return of the senators. That will happen when this Assembly debates P119 at its next meeting in February, as that required a 6-week lodging period and royal assent was only received in early December. The changes which were adopted in third reading by 44 votes pour and no votes contre after the debate in June 2025 include extending the vote to all prisoners, placing the management of the hustings process with the Jersey Electoral Authority, and alterations to the postal voting deadlines. They also include the reduction to 1 year of the residency criteria for voters, as proposed by Deputy Jun. The other changes relate to revisions to the definition of a spoiled vote, which will hopefully reduce issues with the returns from after the vote count. Alterations to how candidates' addresses are published if they wish to use an alternative, and changes to some of the processes around pre-poll and postal voting, mostly to accommodate the move to a Sunday election. I wish to remind members that we have previously debated these changes at length, and this Act simply brings all of the law amendments agreed by this Assembly into effect in time for this year's elections. Sir, I make the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Is the Act seconded? Thank you. Does any member speak on the Act? Conor St John.
Thank you, sir. So I think it would be amiss not to raise 2 points. Whilst I fully support the extending the vote to all prisoners and the reducing the residential criteria, so I have serious concerns about the hustings process. Recently, the Greffier confirmed to us that it was planned for no speeches at hustings. So I think that's a complete move away from what the public want. And I do think, sir, that would be a mistake. It should be for the candidates to agree a framework for their own hustings and not have it prescribed by any authority. The second point, sir, I'd like to place on record is my concern, which I mentioned yesterday, about printing the ballot papers off Ireland. That will reduce the amount of time people have got to apply for a postal ballot, because, as Deputy Howell quite rightly pointed out, we are dependent on the weather, sir. And so there will be less of an opportunity for Irelanders to apply for a postal vote, because the postal votes won't be printed on Ireland, sir. And I had confirmed yesterday evening that the secure printers were very capable of doing a secure fulfilment operation, identifying people on an electoral list, identifying which ballots they were entitled to, sir, and going on. And it was stated by the chair PPC that the local provider wouldn't have had time to do it. The local provider still hasn't had what was required, sir. So I don't know how the chair of PPC could make that comment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor. Does anyone else wish to speak on the Act? Conor St Brillard.
Thank you. And speaking so specifically to the question of the prison and prisoners voting, I have to say, sir, that my experience of the last election upon visiting the prison was that there were only 2 prisoners who wished to see me. Maybe it's me, sir, but there was very, very little interest in politics. All they were interested in was where they might live when they left the prison and what job they might be doing. So all I'm saying to PBCs, don't anticipate a great response from this. And I would conclude, sir, by endorsing the comments of my fellow Connetal regarding the hustings. It must be borne in mind that parish halls, where these hustings are very often held, get booked, and it's half term during that period, and we will find that there won't be availability, and so it's all very much last minute, and once again I would agree with him regarding the off-island ballot paper production, but sadly we've agreed upon that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor. Does anyone else wish to speak on the draft? Yes.
Thank you, sir. I know this really is strictly only about a law that we've already had a debate on, and this is about the appointed date that it will come into effect, so the 10th of February, sir. But the point has been made that, of course, if members don't have sympathy with the original changes that were put forward, although it did sound like it went through unanimously back then, so it's interesting that members now may be having misgivings about what they voted for back then, which are coming out now, so that may influence how they ultimately vote. I would say that actually in defence of the electoral authority, although instinctively one might feel that it is correct that candidates should determine their own hustings schedule and content and rules, I think there's a danger to that, and this is no doubt why we passed the law in the first place, is that there needs to be, I think, uniformity across the constituencies about how a hustings will take place. A hustings isn't just a social party that takes place, which can be decided in an ad hoc manner by whoever happens to be the candidates in a particular district, which could, of course, be the whole island for senators. The second point is that it also leaves the established candidates who are perhaps seeking re-election to have a disproportionate sway and say in the format of the hustings. So I think it is absolutely right that standing for election is a very serious matter. It will elect the next members of this assembly, and then that assembly will elect the next government, sir. And there does need to, I think, be proper rules about, I mean, there's been a question submitted just this week, I hope I'm allowed to say that, from somebody asking, will there be speeches automatically, will every candidate be giving a speech during the hustings? Well, do we know that yet? I'll be interested to see what the answer is from our Privileges and Procedures Committee, because it seems to me it's not just a matter for candidates, it's about the public expectation. I think as a voter, I would want to know that every person who's standing for election in Jersey not only has the opportunity to make a speech, and a significant speech, which might be more than just 30 seconds, but actually that they should all have a requirement to give a speech. So instinctively that seems the right thing to do. And if we leave that decision just to the whim of the candidates themselves, they might say, actually, we don't want to make speeches, do we? And imagine if you've got 4 established candidates and only one newcomer saying, we don't want to make speeches, do we? People know who we are already. We can surely just take questions from the Assembly. That there are questions about equity and process, which is why I think we voted for the law in the first place, sir. Voting for prisoners, I don't think it's going to change the world. I think this was ultimately done as a consideration about wider human rights implications. People feel strongly about that. What I would say, sir, and by the way, if you're relying on prisoners' votes solely to get elected, you may struggle, not least because I don't think the turnout's great amongst them. But there is a challenge there, I think, isn't there? Because when we gave the votes to 16-year-olds, who I'm not saying are criminals by any stretch of the imagination, there is a counter piece of work that needs to go on to make sure that those students that we gave, those young people we gave the vote to, have the wherewithal both intellectually and physically to know how to cast their votes and to have access to the information. And I would suggest that there is a piece of work to be done, perhaps with the prison governor, perhaps in consultation with the prison chaplain, although not wanting to overly politicise the chaplain at the prison. God forbid that we should ever not have a separation between church and state.
I don't think God forbid it's parliamentary.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
You withdraw that, please.
God forbid not parliamentary. Sex Panther's okay. But, sorry, sir, I'm just joking there. Probably not the wisest point to make at the moment. I'm not going to refer to that, sir. But let's imagine that prisoners. Yeah, I'll withdraw that. So that was just a thought that I shouldn't have. Was going through my head. It is important that prisoners, if they are going to be given the vote, are given opportunities to engage with at least the literature, the candidates, and that there is I think a wider piece of education that needs to go on in the background. So irrespective of whether there's an election going on, there needs to be a point made about that, sir, about the education that goes with it, sir. The last point I would make, I think the Constable of St John referred to the fact that he's uncomfortable with the reduction in period of time that one needs to be in Jersey from 2 years to 1. No, you didn't say that, so I'll leave that point, sir. But otherwise, I think the debate's already been had, and I certainly welcome these changes.
Thank you, Deputy. Constable St Lawrence.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to ask the Chair of PPC, when he sums up, please, to confirm to members whether or not at the hustings the candidates will be permitted to make a speech. The Constable of St John and St Millard have referred to this, and we may have the wrong end of the stick, but my understanding is that the JEA has said that the hustings will be for candidates to be questioned only. that they will not be giving speeches at the hustings. And the reason, excuse me, for that, as I understand it, and I do stand to be corrected, but I need to know, everybody wants to know, the reason, as I understand it, is that candidates will be able to speak to camera, as we did in the election 2022, and state their reasons for standing at that time. And the JEA feel that to have speeches at the hustings will be moving away from what the public want. The public want to know, want to be able to hear answers from candidates. I may be completely wrong on this. I don't want to set hairs running, but I'm sure that the chairman will be able to confirm or deny that. One other comment just about the JEA deciding on the hustings. We all remember years ago we'd be nominated at the parish hall for an election, whatever that election would be. Certainly for Senate it was at the town hall. And we would then get together and agree when we would have the hustings on a date to suit as many candidates as possible. What has happened this time is that the JEA is setting the dates for the hustings, and they have, again, as far as I understand it, certainly in my parish, sent us a date for the hustings. So we have been told when the hustings will be held in our parish. And there is a slight discourtesy there, I think, because the parish hall is used for a number of community events, as we all know, and they do get booked up in advance. And I think it would have been courteous for the authority to contact the parish in advance to just check that the date that they wanted to suggest would be suitable for the parish and for the parishioners who use our parish halls on a regular basis. Perhaps they can take that into account moving forward. And I come back to the point of the speeches. I hope that I have misunderstood this, because in my opinion, we should, or candidates should be able, in fact, they should be required really, to stand up and address the electorate. And I look forward to hearing the chairman's response. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conrad. Does anyone else wish to speak? Dr. Balash.
Sir, following on from the Constable of St Lawrence, I do hope that the President of the PPC will be able to answer the question that she put to him, because it does seem to me to be very important. I recall that during the last senatorial election in which I participated, I prepared a different speech for each occasion when the senatorial candidates spoke. And that was important because it enabled me to get across to the public my views on a whole range of different subjects. If one is restricted to answering questions, that seems to me to limit the ability of candidates to put across their best face in the way in which they want to do so. It may be that we're all barking up the wrong tree, and forgive me, Chairman, if that is the position, but it does seem to me quite important. I don't recall being present when this particular amendment to the law was debated. I may have been, but I don't recall it at all. But I certainly would have opposed the proposition that the JEA should have responsibility for deciding how the candidates should present themselves to the electorate.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Alex Curtis.
strike me out of order, sir, if it is right. This is obviously an enactment day, but given members are now considering at a very late notice, is it appropriate to ask the Solicitor General, regardless as to the current direction, whether Article 7, that inserts 17, I think 1A, IA, it's hard to read the capitalisation here, whether that provides for the JEA to have that power before we vote on this. Is it legitimate for me to ask the Solicitor General a question before I even attempt to do so?
Yes, I think so.
Then may I ask the Solicitor General, regardless of the intentions of the JEA, which the Chair will probably outline, he has more information on, does the law confer a power on the JEA to prescribe the format of a hustings, not just the date of a hustings, under the article being inserted 17IA?
Forgive me, is the Deputy referring to the Elections Jersey Amendment Law 2025?
The one under which the enactment day we are debating, and it's, I'm just reading from the unenacted copy on Jersey law, linked from the enactment day.
And Article 17A. May I have a moment to look?
Yes, of course, yes. Does anyone else wish to speak on the Act? Yes, Deputy Allen.
Thank you, sir. I think there's been a little bit of confusion again. So the JEA haven't actually made a decision about the hustings at all. I think there's a lot of rumours going round, and I doubt very much that they will have no speeches. I think it will probably be a reduction in the time available to allow more time for those people to ask questions, and this is on the back of what they are hearing from the public. The JEA are not making decisions in isolation. They are actually hearing from the public and the public's views. I think the last time we had a senatorial, the majority of the time ended up being taken up by people making speeches, which meant that I think candidates, and correct me if I'm wrong because I think I only attended a couple, but I think they were only able to answer about 4 questions in total because of the volume of candidates that were standing. This is more about coordination. It's about reducing clashes. It's about ensuring dates are available in advance, because we also have. Because we also have a requirement to film each of the hustings, which was agreed in the last term of office. And in order to ensure that we fulfil that commitment, obviously we have to make sure that we have equipment available, that we have people available to film all of the hustings. So I ended up organising the hustings for my district in the last election, and it ended up being an absolute nightmare. I had 2 chairs that cancelled on me. I had to organise the venues myself and find the venues myself. I had to pay in advance for those venues and then get the money back from the candidates standing in that district. It was an absolute nightmare, sir, and especially when it came to trying to find a chair, for example, because, you know, it has to be someone that everybody agrees on, someone that is impartial and all of those things. And when you have people who are falling ill or whatever and cancelling last minute, when I'm preparing for the hustings myself, it put me under an enormous amount of pressure and actually took time out of my campaign for me to do that. The JEA will hopefully help to coordinate all of this and reduce that kind of stress on candidates. The other point as well is that if this is not adopted, we will lose the reduction in residency criteria for voters, which has been previously agreed. I also wanted to just comment on, I think it was the Constable of St Bollards who talked about those that are serving sentences in our prison here, who he, in his experience, found that they weren't very engaged and all of those things. I will say that the outreach team that we have now are also engaging with people in the system. So hopefully that engagement should increase. So I hope that the points that I've just outlined there have helped bring some clarity as to what it is that the JEA will be doing. And like I said, they haven't made a final decision, and I'm sure they will be listening intently to what members have said this week. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Solicitor General, can you answer that question that you were asked by Deputy Alex Curtis?
Sir, yes. Article 17IA is hustings. It doesn't contain any power for the JEA to determine what format a hustings meeting will take. It does give the JEA power and a duty, in fact, to arrange husting meetings and to make arrangements for when those are to be held and where they are to be held, and arrangements for publicising the fact they are being held.
Can I thank the Solicitor General?
Sir, may I just seek clarification, please?
Yes.
Can the Solicitor General confirm then that the management of the hustings will be down to the candidates themselves, or can be down to them?
Well, I don't think that's a question of law. It must be a matter of common sense, it would seem. I would hope that candidates and those organising the hustings will be able to agree to what the appropriate procedure is.
Thank you. Constable St Martin.
Thank you, sir. I hope it's appropriate for me to say this, but on the order paper this week, question 11 was my question, which was, will the chair advise whether all candidates standing for election at the general election of June 2026 will be required to make a speech to outline their candidacy and manifesto at every husting they attend? Unfortunately, I wasn't in the Assembly to ask a question because I was at a relative's funeral, but I did receive an answer which I know is going to be printed, so I'm hoping I'm allowed to, as I should have asked the question this week, whether it's appropriate for me to read some of the answer, which is: last year the Assembly adopted P28 2025, which made several changes to the elections law. Amongst those changes was a new provision that placed the coordination and management of the hustings with the Jersey Electoral Authority rather than the candidates. In order to maximise the amount of time afforded to the public to pose questions to the candidates, I understand that the JEA will be considering whether to reduce the amount of time available at the beginning of each hustings. And I reiterate, they're saying the JEA will be only considering whether to reduce the amount of time, and hopefully if they're listening to this debate, they will take this on board. Available at the beginning of the hustings event for pre-prepared speeches to be read out. It should be noted that each candidate will also have recorded an introductory video which will be available for the electorate to watch online on Vote JE, and those videos will be signposted to the people attending the hustings. Each candidate will also have their space within the manifesto booklet published by the JEA. So it's good that we're debating this in the Assembly, because hopefully the JEA will listen to this debate and realise that actually it would be good if we could make pre-prepared speeches. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Deputy Alex Curtis, you...
If I could make a speech now on the enactment.
Yes.
I only did ask a question.
Yes.
Having had the advice from the Solicitor General on the interpretation that the JEA do not have a statutory power to force the format within a hustings, only the selection of the date, and I think with that now being heard by the Assembly and no doubt by the JEA, I feel far more comfortable, and I'm sure I will be voting for the enactment day, knowing that they do not have the power to choose unilaterally the length and format of what happens on that day.
Deputy. Does anyone else wish to speak on this matter? Deputy Rob Hall.
Thank you, sir. I want to speak to reiterate what was just said, and whilst I believe sometimes repetition is useful. The JEA do not have the power to determine what goes on. It's clear when you go to hustings of what people want to do. I have to say, deputies hustings with 5 or 6 people everyone making a speech, you've got a lot of time for questions. If there's 30 candidates for senators and they're all making speeches, you're going to have to think between you what you want to do and whether you want to answer any questions. It's up to you, but it is up to the candidates. I just see the JEA, as Deputy Alf said, arranging the place for the hustings and making that a lot easier for us, because if you're standing for election, you want to be busy campaigning, not arranging for where the hustings go. We have talked about this before. I really hope people can just support this and we can then move forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy.
Yes, sir, I'll make a very small observation following Deputy Earl's point about the public response to our speeches, and I suggest there may be a slight gap between the desire of the members of this assembly to make speeches and the desire of the public to hear them. And we might want to just reflect on that.
Thank you, Deputy Reynolds. Does anyone else want to speak on this matter? I call upon the Chair of PPC to reply.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, I'll respond to the Constable of St Lawrence in regards to the dates of the hustings meetings. The JEA will publish a calendar of dates which all election candidates can see in advance of the nomination process so that they can ensure their availability for the events. It is a short time scale of only a few weeks for 3 different types of hustings to be held, and it is important that they are coordinated to avoid clashes or multiple events being held on the same date, as this will increase the costs of filming them all, as was agreed in this Assembly in 2022 when it adopted Deputy Macron's Proposition P49. The JEA's oversight will ensure a level playing field amongst candidates. Newcomers have reported that they found it intimidating for the hustings to be arranged by existing members. There were also issues around responsibility for the arrangements and some candidates being left out of pocket when not everyone contributed to room or microphone hire costs. This change ensures all the events are run the same way, so there's a cohesive approach. Vote.je will also provide impartial chairs to run each event. We have to try new ideas and bring a fresh approach if we are to achieve a better turnout. Then I respond to the Constable St John's and others, of course, about election speeches, and obviously there's been a mention from the Attorney General. I would like to quote from the proposed article which has already been agreed by this Assembly, Article 17IA, hustings. 2. The JEA must arrange a meeting in each relevant parish in relation to the constituency at which each person nominated as a candidate for the election may address members of the public. And I think that is quite clear. I don't think that's in dispute. And if there are any concerns about this, obviously I have had correspondence from the chair of the JEA, Michael Marrett Crosby, and thank you. And I hope to be able to meet him next week to discuss these matters and other matters relating to the election. There was also comment by the Constable of St Bullards about prisoners, and I agree entirely with the Constable of St Bullards. There's going to be a lack of interest if 2 or 3 people do turn out to vote, or want to vote, not turn out, not escape to vote, I would be surprised. And that was one thing that I, like him, was totally opposed to, but there we go, the democracy rules, and obviously this has been debated and voted on. The other thing was the dates we've done. I'd like to cancel. I thank the Constable of St Martin's for quoting my response. That was obviously because Constable Martin's was not here for the oral question. I just forwarded her response, and I thank her for repeating it to the Assembly to make those matters clear. So, summing up, sir, I want to thank members for the points they've raised. All these changes seek to achieve one thing: greater participation by the public of Jersey in the electoral process. An increased turnout strengthens our position as a legitimately elected Assembly. Jersey's current low voter turnout suggests we need to alter how we do things. We have to try new ideas and bring a fresh approach if we are to get as many people as possible exercising their democratic right to vote. PPC is confident that these, mostly administrative amendments, will allow the elections to run more smoothly in June and will make it easier for the public to cast their votes. Sir, I maintain the proposition.
Is the appel asked for? Has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. Once the Act has been adopted, 39 votes for, 2 votes contre.
May we have the two, please?
Those members voting contre, the Connaught Harbour St Lawrence and Deputy Gorst.
Next item is the draft Customs and Excise Amendment Law lodged by the Minister for Treasury and Resources. I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Customs and Excise Jersey Amendment Law 2000, a law to amend the Customs and Excise Jersey Law 1999 to substitute new rates of vehicle emissions duty for certain commercial vehicles. The states, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty in Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
Thank you. Sir, I'm sorry we have to move to finish the day with something that is not exciting, but is actually quite irritating. Members... It's for me. Members will recall that the Finance Law was adopted by the Assembly in December. Following its adoption and during implementation, officers identified a technical layout error in one of the vehicle emissions duty tables relating to commercial vehicles. Specifically, one column of rates in the table is misaligned by a single row, meaning that the highest rate for the top emissions band was omitted, and the rates for certain other bands are incorrect in that they are lower than they should be. This does not reflect what the Assembly approved as part of the budget. Given the importance of legal certainty for importers, agents, and the orderly administration of the duty, and to ensure that duties are collected at the rates approved by the Assembly, I believe it's appropriate that this narrowly focused amendment be dealt with promptly, and I am grateful to members for agreeing that it may be debated today on a shortened blodging period. I sincerely apologise to members for this error and regret that this correction is necessary. I have asked officers to review our internal processes and operating procedures for checking draft legislation to reduce the risk of similar errors arising in future. Sir, as I've explained, this amendment is narrow and technical in nature. It corrects the layout error in the vehicle emissions duty table so that the legislation accurately reflects the rates approved by the Assembly as part of the budget. The policy agreed by members is clear and unambiguous. It is set out in the Budget 2026 to 2029 document and in the accompanying report to the draft Finance Law, which provided for these rates to be uprated in line with inflation. The amendment makes no change to policy, scope or structure. Since the Finance Law came into effect, declarations for the affected categories have attracted the lower rate of duty, which was not the Assembly's intent. Correcting this error ensures alignment between law and policy and will provide legal certainty and fairness for those affected. I again apologise to members for the need to bring this corrective amendment, and I am grateful for their understanding in allowing it to be addressed promptly. I therefore ask members to support the amendment so that the law accurately reflects what was agreed by this Assembly in December. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member speak on the principles? Those in favour kindly show. Thank you very much. The principles are adopted. This is a taxation draft, so there's no referral to scrutiny. Minister, how do you propose the 3 articles?
Please, sir.
Thank you. Are the articles seconded? Does any member speak on the articles in second reading? Those in favour of adopting the articles kindly show. The appellant has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the vote. I can announce the matter has been adopted unanimously in second reading, 41 votes for. Minister, do you propose the matter in third reading?
Yes, please, sir.
Is the matter seconded in third reading? Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the articles as adopted in third reading? Is the appel called for?
Yes, please, sir.
Being called for, members invited to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The draft law has been adopted unanimously in third reading, 40 votes for. Minister, do you now propose the draft act declaring that the Customs and Excise Jersey Amendment Law has immediate effect?
Yes, I do, sir. Thank you.
Is that act seconded?
Yes, sir.
Yes, the greffier needs to read the citation, sorry.
Draft Act declaring that the Customs and Excise Jersey Amendment Law 2000 has immediate effect. The states make this act under Article 12 of the Public Finances Jersey Law 2019.
Minister, do you wish to propose this act?
I do, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to second this
Yes,
act?
sir.
Thank you very much. Does anyone want to speak on this act? Those in favour kindly show. Thank you very much. The act is adopted. Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. The last matter on the order paper is P95, the draft Public Records Amendment Law.
That's correct, sir, but if possible, I prefer to defer it to the next sitting, please.
Defer to the next meeting. Members content to defer to the next meeting? Yes. That concludes public business for this meeting. I ask the Chair of PPC to propose the arrangement of public business for future meetings. Chair of PPC.
Thank you, sir. And firstly, I am formally required to bring the Assembly's attention to the fact that an e-petition has reached 5,000 signatures. Although members are no doubt already aware that the e-petition called "Reconsider and Reverse the Decision to Reduce Funding for Jersey Employment Trust" has reached that threshold, in light of what was said in the States on Tuesday and the actions were taken by the government, I am not proposing that we should hold an in-committee debate on this e-petition. It is open to any member to make that proposition, however, and now is the time for such a proposition to be made. Thank you, members. I will move on to the arrangement for public business. There are some changes to the consolidated order paper. The draft Public Records Amendment Law, which has been deferred by the Minister till the next meeting on the 3rd of February. As members are aware, the draft Alcohol Licensing Law has been listed to continue on the 24th of February. The draft Sanctions and Asset Freezing Law Amendment Regulations have been lodged and listed for the meeting on the 10th of March. And the draft Animal Welfare Law was referred to scrutiny and has been listed to continue on the 24th of March. Looking at the next meeting on the 3rd of February, there are a number of items listed for debate. There's almost certain to be, with only 4 meetings left. I would remind members of the continuation days that are set aside if needed, in order that we could consider all the propositions due for debate that week. And with that, sir, I propose the order of business. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Are members content to proceed as suggested by the Chair of PPC? Are members now content to adjourn until 9:30 on the 3rd of February? The Assembly stands adjourned until that date.